Hi, I'm Carrie Wood.
Hi, I'm Ian Cowell.
And together we are the band Byscore. So when we talk about video game music, we're generally talking about music that has been written specifically for the purpose of appearing in a video game. So stuff that you're hearing in the background as you are playing the game, maybe the title theme or, like boss battle music, stuff like that. There are some exceptions, but.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It's easy to think of video game music as being, bleeps and bloops or whatever sound you might hear from a Nintendo or a Sega, depending on your generation. But really, yeah, anything that was composed or written for a video game, that's video game music.
Yeah, I think the sort of one kind of exception is there's a handful of songs that were written just as pop music that have since become very closely associated with certain video games. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Crazy Taxi both were enormous games, especially in the late 90s, that rather than having stuff written for the game, used Superman by the band Goldfinger was used for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but also Primus was on that soundtrack. Yeah. And then Crazy Taxi notably used basically just The Offspring and Bad Religion as its soundtrack as you're driving around digital San Francisco. So I think there are a lot of folks who will consider those pieces of music video game music, even though they were literally just, popular songs.
Yeah, just
of the era.
Being your exposure, it could count as such.
That's, I think, what really makes video game music, especially stuff from, the late 80s, early 90s, because fun trivia fact is the first video game that featured continuous music was Space Invaders, which is a continuous loop of, it's just 4 notes as a descending D minor scale, but that's the first game that had perpetual music rather than Pac-Man, which had the opening jingle, but then was just sound effects. It didn't have any continuous music on the level. But, so many of these composers were operating in very, very limited spaces where you had 4 channels, maybe, 8, and then maybe I think 16 by the time you got onto the sort of Super Nintendo or Genesis era. But even then, compared to today where, we've got video game composers working with orchestral, symphonic arrangements and are able to pull in 60, 70 person orchestras to do this. It's very different, but I think that's what makes it compelling. The guest musicians for the SMT and Persona release, we had Kev on drums on a couple stuff, our buddy Kev Ragone, who lives in Philly. He's incredible. If you see us, look at our live footage, most of the time, if we have a live drummer, it's Kev.
Yeah.
Violin was provided by our friend Jay Kim, who's an exceptionally talented violin player. He's local to us. And then guest vocals on Wiping All Out was from our friend Lacey Johnson, who's incredible. We've been so fortunate to get to know so many other talented people within the larger VGM community that it would feel like such a waste to not put them to work, basically. So the flutes, we played with my friends Cheryl and Riley, who I know from the Baltimore Gamer Symphony Orchestra, who I used to play with when I was still living in Maryland. We're actually going to be featuring Riley on an upcoming different Persona jazz compilation album that we're contributing to. So everything just sort of gives back to each other. So we met through video game music. He'd been doing his own thing, and then I was in a band called Quick Save when I was still living in Maryland. The video game music community is small but intense, and everybody kind of knows each other. And so we had a mutual friend, Mark Schimmelbusch, who I also play in my second band, Premium Vintage with. He's my guitarist in that band. But he had wanted to do just a panel at an event called MagFest, which is the music and gaming festival that's held outside of DC every January. And he was scheduled to go and then had a work emergency and wasn't able to go. But that's how we met, was basically through a mutual guitar friend in the video game community.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, we started dating, and now I'm in his walls.
I couldn't make it. Then I got booked to also play at another convention a few months later, and I needed a bass player, and so I asked Carrie to play bass. And like she said, now she lives in my house,
Yes.
and I'm sorry I took her away from the other side of the country.
I guess our first release was in like April 2023.
Yep.
Coming up on 2 years of this project in particular.
Feels a lot longer.
But yeah, but like he had his own solo stuff, and then your band Birthday also had done some VGM in addition to like a bunch of very cool like synthwave stuff otherwise.
That's kind of how I got introduced to the community at large too, is already doing, I was into video game music and was a fan of it and go to events, but had a band that I played guitar, we had synthesizers and did kind of like, let's just put it this way, like Miami Vice music. It's all very like, but also fighting ninjas and like on a building. It's very like 80s action movie music. And so we got booked to play a video game music convention and played some covers in there. And then I just got really involved in the community from that point. And then the pandemic happened, and it was very easy to stay home with all my production equipment and just do covers. A lot of the stuff that was influential to me is stuff that you'd find on like the old Nintendo and Super Nintendo, where you are very limited, where they had to do a lot melodically to get the point across. So at least in the context that we're doing it, a big thing for me is taking stuff that was very limited and then expanding upon it. And then a bigger challenge, I think more so, is taking stuff that is CD quality, where you already have a full band or a full idea, and then how do you do that as two people or a trio or in a rock band context or a jazz band or a metal band or whatever you want to do. So I think video game music is interesting just because it's two things. It's cool music. There's bad music too, just like anything else. There's going to be bad video game music, but there's a lot of really good stuff. And so recontextualizing it in the form of a band is really awesome.
I do think that what makes video game music compelling musically is like the interesting little math problem that it presents. Is like some of my all-time favorite soundtrack in video games is the Pokemon trading card game for Game Boy Color. People have done hour-long video essays about the music in this game because it's doing so much with so little. But it's catchy, it's total earworm quality, just gets stuck in your head. And then beyond that, I think really what makes video game music compelling is, I think for me, it's the nostalgia factor. I think for a lot of people, it's the nostalgia factor, where, if you grew up playing Pokemon or Mega Man or Super Mario or Sonic, or even more contemporary things, like to go into a bar and to hear a band, like what we're going to be doing this weekend, where we're opening with Dive Man from Mega Man 4. And I think for some people who are going to be there, it's going to be this like, oh, I remember playing that game. It's going to take them back to that time where they first heard that music. And it's the good memories kind of associated with playing that game and experiencing that music in its kind of natural environment.
That's actually what I was going to bring up too, is like, where were you when you first heard this? And I think that's true of any band you've heard, right? Any musical experience, right? Or engaging with any art. And so for games, yeah, like when I was a kid, my dad really wanted me to play guitar. He's a guitar player. And I wasn't as interested. I liked video games, but there would be things about the music, and I know you can relate to that probably too. But the songs would really get stuck in there. And then when I was learning music, that was an easy thing to kind of go back to and then, recontextualize. If I couldn't get, I don't know, a Metallica or a Megadeth or whatever I was learning at the time, or Electric Six or whatever it might have been that was popular, I knew that I could go and try and pick out something from a Mega Man or a Pokemon or a Mario or Legend of Zelda. And so, yeah, I think for a lot of us who grew up with video games and also grew up with music and all this being so intertwined, it isn't as novel. It's just kind of more of an, oh crap moment, like this, wow, this really works together. Because I know that my dad would come into me playing games and go, oh, this kind of sounds like Iron Maiden, or this kind of sounds like Black Sabbath or something. And to me, it's like, no, it doesn't. But then years later, contextualizing it with the instruments, Yeah, I can definitely hear that. And then the influence that those composers had at the time. A lot of people who were playing Final Fantasy heard this music and said it sounds like Deep Purple. Well, it's because the composer was...
because Nobuo Uematsu loves Deep Purple, so he was doing a lot of ripping off of Deep Purple. But then you had a lot of actual known musicians get involved as well. Notably, Stuart Copeland from The Police did the soundtracks to the Spyro the Dragon games, at least the first 4 of those games. That was all him. Which is cool because he didn't do any video game composing outside of that. He just did Spyro the Dragon, and it's so cool. And you can hear very much like the kind of same sort of stuff that you would hear in his various other projects. It's just like, no, like this still sounds like Stuart Copeland, but you're playing a little purple dragon. You know? It's that sort of thing. And for years, and it really wasn't totally confirmed until more recently, but for years it was rumored that Michael Jackson had been involved in composing the soundtrack to Sonic the Hedgehog 3 because he had been such a huge fan of Sonic 1 and 2. And then you overlay things like Strangers in Moscow on top of the credits theme from Sonic 3, and it's just like, no, this is the same song.
Yeah.
Like, it is the same. The music world and the video game world, I think, have very much been giving back to each other for, more than 30 years now. I would honestly make more of a comparison to like a film score to video game music, in so much that, compared to a TV theme, which is like, you hear it for 60 seconds, maybe at most, and then you're into the show, and you're probably not hearing that theme again until maybe the end credits. Video game music is written to invoke a specific kind of mood, right? So the music that you hear while you're going through like a forest in an RPG is going to be different from the music that you hear when you're in a battle. Or, the final boss theme is probably going to be really intense compared to like the opening sort of like town theme and whatnot. So it's all about, what was the mood that the composer was really trying to capture here? Is this sort of like a serene, calm part of the game, or is this like a really intense kind of fight? I know in my experience, examining a lot of pieces of music, I think like boss themes in particular tend to be, they're in minor keys. There's a little bit of mixed meter in there, because what they want to do is they want to keep the player kind of like off balance, and doing a lot of mixed meter stuff is a very easy way to get the person who's just kind of experiencing this almost passively while they're trying to do something else in the game, kind of like make them feel uncomfortable, right? Yeah, no, I would definitely say having something go in 5 or 7, 8 when you're trying to figure out the best way to beat a boss makes you really uncomfortable. But is musically interesting, and then it's like taking it out of the context then of the game and just listening to it on its own. It's always, most people hear it and say, that's very impressive. Yeah. It's very easy to think of things like video game music, and this has changed over generations, and look at it as just kind of being like, it's child's play. This is a game, this is a toy, it's nothing important. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Like, we've had the honor of meeting some, now much older composers who've been doing this since the 80s and 90s, who maybe didn't even realize that people were listening to their stuff outside of the context of a game, let alone that it's inspired, people to go and do complex jazz pieces or metal rearrangements of stuff that was meant to just be 4 to 8 channels played maybe once, if they even got that far. Right. The amount of music that's people don't even get to hear. That's also true. Pre-YouTube or a soundtrack release is pretty incredible. You get the first few levels, that's it, and that's your take on it. It's not as easy as sitting front to back with an album. For me, it was always a way to skirt around doing any actual work in school. That was the thing, is like I'd take like a music class and I was like, this is something I care about more, so I can relate it a bit. When it came to like, at least for me, really breaking stuff down is when I was trying to cover the material. Like I'd watch like essays or read about whatever synths they may have had, like whatever's in the Sega Genesis or the Mega Drive, depending on where you live, is the same thing as a Yamaha DX7. It's the same chipset. So that's why it has that really, depending on who you ask, they love or they hate an FM synthesis sound. I love it personally. I would say probably like mid 2010s is when I really started to like, when I was getting more in the synthesis, breaking down those sounds and not just taking it and putting it to guitar. I think for me, you've always been, I think, focused on like the actual sound quality, whereas for me, it's always been about how do I take this and apply it to an instrument that I can actually play. When I was in high school, I was very fortunate to go to a high school that at the time had a very robust music program. And we had a set of classes called music technology, which was basically using like baby's first DAW to, arrange things in MIDI. And the teacher of the class, one, was a big nerd himself. I remember him being a huge fan of The Legend of Zelda. But even beyond that, like, there wasn't any restrictions on what kind of music we could be doing in that class. So the stuff that I was doing in that class was I was taking my favorite games at the time, so The Legend of Zelda and Golden Sun and Pokemon, and just using this, digital audio workspace to arrange the music so that I could then learn it myself. I was lucky enough to have a dad that put a bass in my hands when I was about 9 years old. And then by the time I was 14 or 15, I was teaching myself how to play guitar as well. And all the stuff I was teaching myself on guitar was literally just video game music. It was all Legend of Zelda stuff. Because that's what was stuck in my head. So that's what I wanted to play. So yeah, I wasn't really getting so much into recreating the actual sounds of it until much more recently.
Yeah, I mean, same here. It was when it came to recording stuff, at first it was like I'd be in bands in high school and learn covers of stuff at the time or try and write originals. And we all know how it goes to write originals in high school. Usually not that great. But there were occasional like video game tunes I would attempt to do poorly. And a lot of folks weren't really as open to wanting to do it. It wasn't as big as it was. Yeah. But for me, I was also like following a lot of bands like The Advantage, who are from Sacramento, and the Mini Bosses, who at the time from Arizona, and bands that were taking old NES and Nintendo tunes that only had those 4 tracks and doing it as like dual twin lead guitar bands. Like, oh, cool, so this sounds like a Thin Lizzy part, but it's from the Goonies on the NES. That's crazy. For me, there was CD quality stuff out. We couldn't afford it. We were definitely like a Super Nintendo, Genesis house. Like, we didn't have like a bunch of PC stuff, and friends of mine who had PC games, they had access to CD-ROM or maybe had a PlayStation first, right? So like, everything for me was just kind of like between 4 and 8 channels, really sampled down, like the Donkey Kong Country stuff too. A lot of that was done on like a Core Gem 1 and then sampled and then crushed way. It's impressive that it even sounds like that compared to the stuff that came out like in like 90 or 91 on that console. In like that 5-year span, it's gotten huge. But like, I mean, I'm born in 87. So it was ripe time between like, oh, this sounds really cool and sounds like this. But then also there's CD quality stuff. Everything was impressive. Everything felt like it was, I don't know what's new and what's not. It was just there to be digested and then just planted seeds that came way down the road. I don't know. It's like, I know that era of musically stuff on like the Super Nintendo means a lot to me because that's what I had access to and played, and like the Nintendo 64. But I just know at that time it was a mixed bag, just kind of depending on what you could afford to have, what was available to you. So for me, it was a lot of stuff that was very like guitar harmony sounded based, or like it sounded like a rock band would do it. What would you say for you?
Same era, so I was born in 89, but the difference is that I was not allowed to have a console in the house. I was not allowed to have a console that hooked up to the television because I believe the belief was that I would not leave the house, which in hindsight is completely fair. But I was fortunate. I grew up in a neighborhood that had a lot of other kids my age. So I had the family across the street that lived there for a long time. They had a Sega Genesis, so that's how I got to experience like Sonic and the Sonic music, which is incredible. And then I had a friend in the neighborhood with a PlayStation. I had a friend in the neighborhood with an N64. I only ever had Nintendo handheld. My first gaming system that was mine was my Game Boy Color because I was 8 or 9 years old when Pokemon first got big. And I literally would not shut up about it. And I think they just finally caved. So I was all about just like the Game Boy stuff. And so fortunately, like the Game Boy library was so robust. So I was playing stuff like, the entire Pokemon franchise, of course, but then Harvest Moon and The Legend of Zelda and plenty of other games, but also all had these like memorable soundtracks. But the Game Boy, even the Game Boy Color chip was only 4 channels. So it was very limited, but even then, like, so many of those themes just really kind of like stuck with me. And it wasn't really until I was in like college and buying my own consoles for myself that I really started thinking, I think, a little bit more about like the capabilities. Because for me, it was always like, you know, the melodies are what stuck with me. It didn't really matter what it was coming from. It was like, you know, the tune itself stuck with me kind of regardless. I think when we're recording, it's generally all digital.
So
Sometimes
easy.
he'll mic up an amp, but that's pretty few and far between at this point in time. Yeah, I mean, so I've been using since I was in high school a Ampeg Portabase 250. I had the combo version for years, and then when I moved, I took the separate head and cab version. I use pedal-wise, my go-to for the last few years, I use a Cali 76 compressor, which helps get that nice little bit of envelope kind of vibe to it. But honestly, I think so much of my tone tends to come from the fact that I play almost exclusively short scale basses and I use almost exclusively flat wound strings. So I think that has as much to do with the tone as anything that I'm running it through in terms of a signal chain.
I like guitars, I like amps, but I also will play anything. I don't discriminate when it comes to gear or quality. I feel like I have been fortunate enough to have a lot of people in my life that have fed me so much good music and influence and have all been very different people. But it's also like being raised at a buffet, because I just don't really know what I want to sit down and eat. I'm just like, I'll have some buffalo wings and some ribs and a salad. It's just like, whatever sounds good is fine. So it's like, I get tone questions a lot and I feel kind of bad because it's different, but it all sounds like me. So it's this thing of like, I like everything, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day, but people don't want to hear that. They want to hear that there's a magic thing that sounds this way, right? I have a really nice Laney LA30BL. It needs to get taken to a shop because it has a little bit of trouble. It's a 30-watt non-master volume amp, so it just has one volume. It just has a gain, so it sounds incredible, and you can't turn it up all the way. So I use an attenuator sometimes. Most of the time, though, I do everything in the box because I've mic'd a bunch of stuff. It sounds great. It's also a lot of work. But yeah, I like Strat style bodies. I like Telecasters. I love Gibsons. I love guitars. But for me, it's just like, if it sounds good, it is good.
So we released them initially digitally as two separate EPs, two separate 6-track EPs. And it's all from this larger franchise called Shin Megami Tensei. Now, in the United States, a sub-series, basically a spin-off of Shin Megami Tensei called Persona, is very popular. Persona 5 was enormous in the US. The music, however, even across both sort of ends of the franchise, has generally been handled until recently by one guy, Shoji Meguro, who, incredible composer, very versatile. And we're big fans, not just of the Persona franchise, but of the larger Shin Megami Tensei stuff. And a lot of times when we've done mainline Shin Megami Tensei stuff in other projects, we've been asked, oh, is this Persona? And so that's why we called the SMT half, is this Persona? Because that's just like the running joke.
Yeah.
And then the other half was, no, this is Persona. So 6 tracks from Shin Megami Tensei and then 6 tracks from the Persona sub-series, basically running the gamut of essentially the entire franchise up until now, between the very first Shin Megami Tensei, which was released in 1989, to Persona 5, which first released in 2017 and then had an updated version a couple years later. So it's basically, we're just big fans of the franchise. We love Shin Megami Tensei, we love Persona, we love the music, and because it's so varied, we knew that it would make for a very interesting kind of combination of genres and sounds. So you've got stuff like A Lone Prayer, which was the tune from Persona 1 that we included, which is very kind of like contemporary pop music. But then you have Cathedral of Shadows from Shin Megami Tensei 2, which is this like Baroque, almost Bach-inspired organ piece that I turned into a guitar and bass piece instead. So yeah, it's a huge franchise with a lot of games and a lot of music in it that we just wanted to sort of explore in this fashion. We were in the room a lot together. We have like our guest room at home is essentially the music office / guest space. But yeah, for these two EPs that were then released as, you know, a combined album, that was all done like together.
Yeah.
At home. I don't know personally a lot about like mixing or anything like that. That's all this guy. I do a lot of the arranging. I play bass. I played a little guitar on this as well. But for me, like my arranging process is I sit at my desk like a shrimp and go mildly insane until something gets finished. And then, you know, I pass on the MIDI to him and he turns that into stems and then we sort of parse it out from there and get to recording. Last year we did 17 shows between live appearances and then stuff streamed online.
Just this band, too.
Just this band, yeah. So that doesn't include anything that I did with Premium Vintage or anything that he did with the Band of Goblins or like solo stuff. We try to get to like conventions and whatnot. There's a lot of video game and anime conventions that feature bands like ours, which is great, but I think because both of us have such an extensive history of playing live and other types of projects, we really like just playing bars, you know.
Yeah, that's a favorite.
That's a big one for us. There's a lot of great little venues near us. We played a show at this place called the Ivy Room last year. That was a lot of fun. We've actually been hired to do music for an upcoming indie game. There's this franchise called Toho Project. It's been around for decades now, but the one that we've been hired to do is it's a farming sim similar to like a Stardew Valley or something like that, that's using the Toho characters in that sort of cute little farming context. So we've been hired as part of the music team. It's us and a couple other VGM arrangers who are taking some pretty intense Toho music, because Toho itself is a shoot 'em up. It's a vertical, almost like Galaga. So there's a lot of very intense music, and so we're taking that, we're making it like cute and cozy little farming sim kind of vibe.
This is the fall music.
That's due out probably late summer. It's going to be called Toho Farming Minorico's Homestead Harvest, and so that's our kind of big current project, is getting the music done for that in time for the game to launch on time. And then we are basically halfway done with like our next sort of like full-length mixed album, rather than something that was so heavily themed like the Shin Megami Tensei and Persona project. Our first album, The Hot Light, came out in mid-2023, so we think it's time for another sort of like hodgepodge of all the other stuff we've been working on to come out.
You can find it on all streaming services. Your best bet is going to be
buyscore.bandcamp.com.
The SEO on that one.
If you really want to support us, find us on Bandcamp. You can buy our albums on Bandcamp. You can buy CDs of both of our albums on Bandcamp now. We finally put The Hot Light on CD. You can find us on YouTube, where I believe we're at Byscore Band on YouTube.
Anywhere online, you'll find us as green goblinized versions of ourselves. You see us here on your television or your computer monitor. You'll see us, we're just green. We're very easy to spot.